Hey there, guys, gals, and those in between. We're back, and it's now time for us to explore the depths of chaos. That's right, we're going to explore a title in the Final Fantasy series that I feel like is being overlooked, and in my opinion, is one of the better things Square has recently given us. So let's sit back, relax, open a frosty beverage, and we'll explore the world that is Stranger of Paradise.
Chaos.
No.
Now, before we actually start, I think I should cover a few things, well, mainly two things. First, my last videos on Silent Hill 2 did great. So much the smart money would be to go ahead and talk about, well, Silent Hill 3, so it can be boosted by the algorithm. But I never claimed I was smart. I do these videos for fun. I'm getting paid literally nothing. This is a hobby. So since it is a hobby, I'm going to choose interesting topics that I want to talk about. Secondly, a lot of people pointed out various mistakes I made during my last two videos, and yeah. In truth, I churned those out quickly to go on vacation because, again, I do work a full-time job, so I didn't give them the second and third look over they deserved. Ironic, the videos I spent the least amount of time on are the ones that blow up. Only thing I can say is moving forward is I have 300 subscribers now, so I think the output on this channel does deserve a fair bit more attention. It's better to delay so that we can have quality. Now with that out of the way, it's time to talk about Final Fantasy and Stranger of Paradise. Stranger, or SOP, as one of my friends calls it, was announced during E3 2021, which might also be the last E3 ever by the looks of it. As part of Square's showcase, announced as an action-oriented spin-off and a prequel story to that of the original Final Fantasy. So for those who don't know, let's briefly talk about the original and why I think a prequel was actually a pretty decent idea. The original Final Fantasy was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi, and according to a long-standing rumor, without this game being a massive success, Square was doomed to fail. Thus, this was their Final Fantasy. But yeah, no, that's bunk. Or maybe half bunk. Sakaguchi, or the Gooch as his friends call him, has done interviews stating that Square were doing just fine. They had hits, they had misses, but they weren't in any financial straits at all, and he just liked the FF title for linguistic reasons, being shortened to FUFU in Japanese. He's done interviews stating that he felt like he wasn't having much success in the game industry, and that this would be his final game if it didn't become a hit, that he'd go back to university and try something else. Then there are other times where he stated that the game actually needed to become a hit for Square to remain soluble. This could easily just be a case of misremembering events from close to 40 years ago, which, hey, I've had a hard time remembering events from 4 hours ago. But as of a 2015 interview with Famitsu, he stated that he just liked the name and denied the final game theory. So honestly, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, with Sakaguchi deciding to leave if it didn't work. Square itself had little to no interest in the project, hence me more believing the latter. Square just thought RPGs wouldn't sell well, which is ironic because that's what we associate with them now. And he was only given permission to do one after Dragon Quest's success. Given a small team that had zero experience in, well, their jobs, they were disregarded for the most part and looked down on. Christ, why is every history about a game being made just that? It's almost like there's a massive pervasive issue here. But yeah, battle system designer, never designed a battle system. Game programmer, never programmed anything like this. Again, I must ask, why do I keep running into this same fact? Just treat your employees nice, please. A bit of a funny note is that series artist Yoshitaka Amano was originally not going to be used because Sakaguchi never heard of him. The irony is real because Amano has sketched the title for every mainline Final Fantasy game. So with his misfits, Sakaguchi was expected to sell only 200,000 copies. He begged and pleaded for Square to produce at least 400,000, that way he can at least make a sequel. And in Japan alone, the game sold 500,000. Now finally seeing dollar signs in their eyes, Square aggressively marketed the game in the States via Nintendo Power and other such gaming magazines. If you had Nintendo Power growing up at the time, you knew what Final Fantasy was because of how much money they poured into the marketing. Which, well, it worked, and here it became a success, and because of that, the Final Fantasy series is going on strong 3 decades later. There was a saying that Dragon Quest owns the East, and Final Fantasy owns the West. Now, this is important because the first Final Fantasy is more remembered for starting the series than, well, anything else. Nowadays, people only really play it because of nostalgia or do challenges like having a party of one class or beating the game with one character only. This is for a myriad of reasons, but essentially Final Fantasy 1 gave us some good ideas and future games built upon those ideas. So now, spoilers I guess for a game going on 35 years, and well, it relates to Stranger of Paradise, so we have to talk about it. Final Fantasy 1 starts with you picking your party members heading into town to discover a knight named Garland has kidnapped the princess and that you are the 4 Warriors of Light, destined to stop the fiends and bring light back to the crystals that represent the 4 elements. After beating Garland, you save a town from pirates, get tricked by a dark elf named Astos, beat Astos, get a Witcher eye back, awaken an elvish prince, and then proceed to a new continent. Here you see a land dying with the villagers begging you for help, beat a vampire, only to discover the real culprit is the Fiend of the Earth Lich. Beat him, once you do that, the Fiend of Fire wakes up early, you beat her, learn the other 2 fiends have woken up 400 and 200 years ago, and they destroyed entire civilizations. You find a fairy, get the ability to breathe underwater, fight the Kraken, learn a dead language, get a warp cube, find a castle in the sky, fight the Fiend of Air, Tiamat, before heading into the first dungeon and going back in time. In the past, you fight the stronger versions of said fiends before encountering the first boss, Garland. Here he reveals that when he was defeated, the fiends brought him back in time, and then he sent them in the future, thus creating a time paradox. After that, he turned into the final boss of the game, Chaos. After beating him, the time loop is broken, the world is restored with even Garland, but the journey you went on becomes merely a legend and nothing more. Now, the story of the first game, yeah, it's short, but this was 30 years ago, and many of the themes and elements would become tropes in and of itself repeated in Final Fantasy games and JRPGs in general. As for the gameplay, that's where things have not aged that great. If you know what you're doing, you can actually beat the game in a short time, 20 hours or less. The issue is knowing what you're doing. If this is your first time, unless you have a guide, you have to really talk to every person in town to be able to parse between what's just people rambling on about nothing to plot critical points. Secondly, the encounter rate of battles can only be considered atrocious. Get ready to not go a full minute without running into an enemy. And lastly, the dungeon design is frustrating. Let's just say this game sold a lot of strategy guides. The main reason for these obtuse maps that lead to dead ends is because the game was heavily inspired by D&D. We see this not only the dungeons, but also in a lot of enemies being ripped right from said franchise. So the idea of going into these caves where you constantly take damage, run into dead ends would make sense, but it didn't translate that well into a game like this. However, all things I mentioned would be improved on in later games. That said, the game still holds up decently, flaws and all. For a game going on 35 years old, it's still worth a look back, more so for what will come after. With its success, we got more Final Fantasy games until, like the first one, we've looped back to a prequel in Stranger of Paradise.
Chaos.
No.
Now, before we talk about the first trailer and reaction, you should know this game has been in the works for close to a decade. Tetsuya Nomura of Kingdom Hearts fame, and also what happens when a hot topic becomes sentient and morphs into a human being, has been thinking about this since Dissidia 012, Duodecim, a title so silly I can't help but love it. He wanted to do an action game where you would explore dungeons, and he also had another idea about a game detailing the adventures of an angry man, along with a prequel to the Final Fantasy series. He decided to just kind of throw all those together. Originally, he wasn't really feeling it being connected to the lore of Final Fantasy, so I've heard some people say that Stranger is a shameless cash grab piggybacking off the Final Fantasy name, which I will dispute later in this video. Honestly, Stranger is a lone bright spot in a spat of bad Square news. That being said, Part 1, because of its bare-bones story, is the best to explore. As I've stated, Part 1 isn't some sacred cow, and seeing how they made radical changes to 7 which holds a lot more weight, and let's not even get started what they did with Part 4 with the after years. Oh, we'll get to that one soon. Square has always tried to get the most mileage out of their games, to varying results. They've also already added on to Part 1 story with the Dissidia series itself. Now, I won't get too much into Dissidia. Yes, it clearly inspired Stranger, but as of writing the script, I know this video is going to be longer than my patience when grinding for a super boss, so let's not add more to it. Dissidia is an arena-based fighter with heroes and villains of the Final Fantasy series, with a story involving the first Cid of the Final Fantasy game, who's only mentioned in passing in the original game. Now, Dissidia plays a small part in the main game of Stranger, and a much larger one in the DLC. But there's really only one thing you need to know, which I'll reveal, and you just need to know the general idea of, at a place outside of space and time, a bunch of heroes from the Final Fantasy series fought each other in a never-ending battle. I played it, and Dissidia is really fun with a unique combat system. One attack raises your bravery, which you then use to shave off your opponent's HP. The more bravery you accumulate, the more HP you can take from your opponents. But doing an HP attack reduces your bravery to 0, making you vulnerable, and nearly all your attacks leave you open to getting hits. So it's very crucial to know the in and outs of your abilities, their range, their power, and how open they leave you. It's just a shame the first two are PSP only with no way to play them on modern systems outside piracy. I triple checked this time, trust me. The last connection to the city is that Team Ninja did the only one available to modern systems, being NT, which I can't really recommend. It's not as good as the PSP ones. It does some interesting things, but this came out at a time when Square decided we didn't want content. So it's pretty sparse and was sadly par for the course for Square at the time. The battle system is good though, and it was decided that Team Ninja would be the best to tackle a more mature and action-oriented game in the Final Fantasy world. Which is rather ironic, seeing as 16 came out, with it being a mature and more action-oriented Final Fantasy game made in-house. But now, like a time loop, we go back to that first infamous trailer.
Chaos.
No.
At E3, the trailer of Stranger of Paradise was lambasted for reasons I still can't quite fully understand. I was excited for it. With Team Ninja behind it, it seemed that it was going to be Final Fantasy Neo. And Neo is not only a successful game, but one that I personally enjoyed. So the idea of that combat system while letting me fight Final Fantasy enemies seemed like a dream come true. Plus, that trailer song let us know we were in for a killer soundtrack true to the Final Fantasy name. And I was shocked, to say the least, of not only the tepid reception, but also the meme status of the game. With, to this day, people trying to claim the game is not good, it just memed too hard. Spoiler warning, we haven't got to a review, but yeah, I think this game is pretty damn good. The phrase chaos became the thing to talk about. So much so, there's even a Kotaku article that's just the word chaos over and over and over. Which I don't want to just dunk on Kotaku, but this kind of proves my point. They've always struggled between being a news source and just being a blog. Nomura and others were disappointed by the reaction the trailer got. I mean, I'm right there with them. Final Fantasy Neo, which is an insane term, got reduced to just talking about chaos. It's a Final Fantasy origin story, and Chaos is the last boss of that game. So yes, he would be mentioned. Also, he wasn't even mentioned that many times. Yes, did you in fact know that memes are not actual facts? I know, it's strange to think about, but similar to Frieza never saying this isn't my final form, I have people who swear that they've heard that. And no, they haven't, it's not real. So I rewatched the first trailer. The word chaos is only mentioned 8 times, in a video that runs a little over 2.5 minutes. The producer of the game, Jin Fujiwara, stated that while he was happy the trailer got some traction, as any reaction is better than no reaction, him and the team weren't pleased it just became a joke. Because once more, it's a Final Fantasy origin story. It would be like saying there's too much talk of Metal Gear in Metal Gear. I can understand where he's coming from, but I feel like this meme status ultimately hindered the reach of the game. Because some people saw it as just that, just a joke. Relegated to the same bin as Michael Morbius and It's Morbin Time. Heck, I'm probably one of 10 people that actually saw Morbius. And once more, I've seen quite a few reviews of Strangers that say it's an overblown meme, from people who clearly did not want to give it a chance. Because when actually played, many reviewers changed their tune. When the demo was released, while many saw parts to prod and make fun at, for the most part, once these publications started playing the game, they related the same thing, that the gameplay was really solid. While there were some technical issues with the first gameplay trials, it's a work in progress, what can you expect? Most reviewers gushed over this fast pace of gameplay and the use of the job system, enjoying the intricacies of the break system and being able to combo, saying they couldn't wait for more. And yet there really wasn't a lot of hype, and I can think of a few reasons. The first was the fact that it came out during E3, which is probably no longer a thing. And yeah, Square's presentation was not the best. First came the announcement of Babylon's Fall, a live service game which is so terrible it's already dead. We got word of Marvel's Avengers, which people were hyped until they found out it was a live service game, which is now also dead. An HD remaster of Legend of Mana, nice. Pixel remasters of the first 6 Final Fantasy games, but they were Steam only at the time, which was an odd choice and just annoyed people. Really, it was just overall a bad presentation that had 1 or 2 bright spots. So something new and different like Stranger Paradise, in my opinion, was related to that it must be bad pile. It already had a stink associated with it. If it was released around stronger titles and not just remasters, and maybe remasters that weren't Steam only at the time, I feel like people would have at least been intrigued. There are also a few more reasons I think this game was unfortunately fighting an uphill battle.
Chaos.
No.
Now, I can say with confidence, I fucking love Square Enix. And it's because of them I found the love for JRPGs branching off into things like the Shin Megami Tensei series, and why I will even play bargain bin JRPGs. For real, if you know some overlooked ones, tell me in the comments. Growing up in the PlayStation PS2 era, they really were the Seamus of the JRPG world.
Banger after banger after banger after banger after banger after banger after banger.
Square has so many properties though, they've fallen into the same pit as their contemporaries, with many of their IPs just gathering dust, doing nothing. It goes without saying the Square of today is not seen in the same light as the Square of old, and this isn't uncommon. With the 7th generation of gaming, this was just a bad time for Eastern developers, whether it was Square, Konami, or Capcom. All of them having their fair share of troubles in regards to development costs, not being accustomed to new technology they are programming for, big Western pushes with mixed success rates at best, and internal power struggles. Now, Capcom in recent years seems to have regained some of that lost luster. When you think of them, it's no more Bionic Commando, but more Street Fighter and new Devil May Cries. And while yes, there have been some issues here and there, for the most part, Capcom is growing back that fan base that they burned out. This is something though that took years of effort. It was not something that was done overnight. But Square now only just seems to be doing that. It doesn't help that they've currently embroiled in disaster after disaster. And that is not a joke. Like I said earlier, not having 1 but 2 games as a service that were so bad they both died. Babylon's Fall in particular lasting a little over a year. And for those who don't know, the games as a service model, the ideal is at least 10 years. Games as a service is a contentious topic. I haven't done anywhere enough research. However, it seems some games as a service can provide a quality experience, but only in the cases where not only is the game good, but one where the devs have to constantly be updated in order to ensure a healthy player pool. And there are only so many games that can feed that live service model niche. It's similar to a battle royale. It's very competitive and tough to make one succeed and have it last long term. There really is no rest for those type of games, and they can die quickly. You can look up top 10s of live service games that are dead or battle royales that died. Square just saw how much money those games made and decided they wanted in on that while providing little to no content. Even if Babylon's Fall had more to do with Platinum more than anything, it still isn't a good look. Besides their infatuation with squeezing every penny, they seem to not care about the games they have on file. They've released a plethora of games with zero to no fanfare. Were you aware that Romancing Saga Minstrel Song got an HD remaster on modern systems? I didn't till doing this video. I made 2 videos on the Saga series and I didn't find out about this till I just rummaged through one of their online sales. And yeah, Minstrel Song is one of the best remakes of all time and goes so hard. Oh, we are definitely doing more Saga stuff in the future, don't worry. Let's not forget Square's horrible NFT debacle, which they had more than one for some reason. First, them getting into bed with what was obviously just a speculative bubble. This isn't your friend who slept all the way through high school telling you, bro, this is the future, I'm gonna be rich, watch me. And you try to warn him as he puts 40 plus hours of overtime every paycheck and continues to funnel it into what is obviously a scam, only to see his face drop when he loses tens of thousands of dollars of money that would have been better invested. What, was that just me? Okay. Anywho, this isn't your dumb friend. This is a multi-billion-dollar company that has what I assume people that know math and have some idea of how the stock market works. Even then, they decided to go all in on the NFT thing. Well, all game companies did, but Square went hard. Square said, hold my potion, I'm gonna lose so much money on what is clearly a pump it up scheme. Releasing things as dumb as Final Fantasy VII toy NFTs. Yes, you won't get the toy, but a link which goes to a picture of the toy. Doesn't help that it's Final Fantasy VII, the game that starts with you doing environmental terrorism. Yeah, that's the game you want to use something that burns an indecent amount of fossil fuels. This also isn't old news. Like I said, all game companies tried the NFT thing, and in a rare moment of gamers rise up, actually working, everyone seems to have abandoned it, minus Square. They have continued to push forward after NFTs crashed. And that's not a joke. Square hyped a game that many thought would be part of the Parasite Eve series, only to reveal it's an NFT game. A game that got a trailer in March of 2023. I have no idea why Square is deciding we don't prefer our tokens to be fungible when we clearly do. Let's also not forget Chocobo Racing, a sequel to a long-awaited game that was good, but was such a microtransaction-filled hellscape that players in Square both abandoned it in less than a year again. So sadly, we'll never see Jack in a kart racing game. Maybe when Bloodborne Kart happens, who knows. Lastly, of course, was Square selling damn near all its Western IPs, minus Fear Effect for reasons. I did an entire video on that one. Watch it, it's good. What I'm saying here is Stranger came out of the worst time where we expected nothing from Square and we were just being shoveled absolute garbage. Its release in a dark period means that if Square is on the rise, it's going to be seen as part of those dark times instead of the Renaissance where it belongs. This doesn't help that while Square has a bad name, sadly Final Fantasy has suffered the same fate.
Chaos.
No.
Now, Final Fantasy is a massive series. So much just browsing the Wikipedia for it, it lists off 118 games as part of the franchise, released on some way or another. Of course, mobile games are counted, but still, over 3 digits is an impressive feat that I don't think many other franchises could follow. Of course, that's not even mentioning other forms of media like novels, movies, mangas. Final Fantasy is a massive franchise, but a franchise for many in decline. The strength of Final Fantasy has always been that they've never been afraid to try new things. Many games are so radically different from each other. Just look at the leap from parts 1 to 2, introducing a story much wider in scope and scale and being what is essentially the beta version of what will become the Saga series. From the start, Final Fantasy was always about reinvention and never resting on one's laurels. Now, this means that as a matter of course that each game, while you might love it, others will be more impartial towards it. I won't go over every single Final Fantasy game, but just my experience in the PS1 ones because, well, I grew up on those. So going back, 7 I feel personally isn't greatly paced and is incredibly easy with no real depth when it comes to battles. 8 to me feels like its only flaw is that it wasn't 7. I love the junction system and I enjoy this more surreal take on the story. However, I understand how some people would miss just being able to cast spells, and while the Guardian Force animations are cool, they can be bothersome after the 5th attempt. 9 felt like a return to form, a classic Final Fantasy with predetermined classes, while having a grandiose story about identity and the soul. However, some felt this made it antiquated and outdated. Now, notice how I said I'm not a huge fan of 7? I still actually really enjoy playing that one, and that is Final Fantasy for the most part. Even if there are things you don't like, there's enough there that even if it's not your favorite, it's still a stellar game. An okay Final Fantasy game is still a high-ranking RPG. That seemed to be the consensus until that dreaded 7th generation came along. The much hyped and lauded Final Fantasy XIII, which was the first game for that generation, and also the first one to not be a Sony exclusive in years, being shared on Xbox systems. It was still a success, but it divided the fan base. Even Square CEO commented on the game, which, yeah, unless they're uttering praises, you never want the CEO to weigh in on a product. Yoichi Wada stated, "Some value it highly, and some are not happy with it. Should Final Fantasy become a new type of game, or should Final Fantasy not become a new type of game? The customers have different opinions. It's very difficult to determine which way it should go." Which I don't even understand what that means, honestly. New type of game? That's every Final Fantasy. In my opinion, I enjoyed 13 a lot. It had one of the best battle systems in the series, and I will die on that hill. Mixing real-time and the turn-based action that JRPGs are known for. The paradigm system, which was essentially switching jobs on the fly, made for a great use of strategy. It's just that the game is overly linear and you don't really get to use and check out that paradigm system till you beat the game. I did enjoy the characters, but it's a flawed game that holds your hand the entire way through, and you don't get to fully appreciate that battle system that I wish someone would just copy. Heck, I might do a video on 13 because I enjoyed the series that much. That wasn't the end though. Final Fantasy XIV was also released and it was bad. That's not an opinion. A Realm Reborn was great, but 14 was so bad they nuked the game to make way for the relaunch. And while A Realm Reborn is fantastic, it's an MMO and you need to dedicate time to it. An insane amount of time. And not everyone wants to do that. Some people want a single player experience without a monthly cost. Final Fantasy XV would then release, and it's once more divisive. Besides being kind of bare on release, which was just a thing for games at the time, I don't know why, the characters and combat is great, but the story is, well, missing. The Royal Edition added more, but yeah, there's just a lot that's not mentioned in the base game, along with the second half just reeking of being unfinished with a forced time skip, and the world shrouded in darkness having only one real destination you can go to. It felt like the team were rushed, and even the planned DLC was scrapped. So really, we got no explanation for a lot of the game, like what the Star Scourge was. So it's gonna go down as a Final Fantasy that just never got completed. Which again, was just kind of a thing for games at that time. I don't want to keep referencing Metal Gear, but it's just there. The 7 remake falls into the same category. There are some who love it, but there are many who equally hate it. While the battle system got praise, once more seen as an evolution of real-time mixed with active time battle that the series is known for, the game is overly linear, so yeah, if you didn't like 13, you're not gonna like what 7 does. You get no real freedom to go here, go there. It seems like the game is a lot of just filler, and it's also incredibly short. The story was also either seen as something remarkable or some random BS about ghosts, which to me it's both. Some of the new additions, like making Barrett not racist, was pretty great. The ghost stuff and Zack maybe being alive, not so much. Now we've reached Final Fantasy XVI, and while it once more made radical changes, which is par and parcel with Final Fantasy as a whole, always trying new things, and also having Yoshi P in charge, even if you disagree with some of those changes, the passion comes through and it finally feels like a Final Fantasy to unite the fanbase. It doesn't feel rushed, nor incomplete, and for many they see it as a start of a hopeful rise for Square. It's so popular among fans that there was actually no DLC planned, but people liked it so much, Yoshi P is like, okay, I guess I'll start working on some DLC. People literally want me to take their money. Sad news, however, while working on the script, it was revealed Square lost $2 billion. That's with a B in value. And that's with 16 doing well, with many analysts basically saying what I did. They've just released a lot of big budget games that are mediocre at best, and they have an over-reliance on their name and that of Final Fantasy without releasing other games in their vast category without any love or care. So, bad news, but most people see 16 as a sort of Square rising from the ashes. But I would argue Stranger was that rise of a quality product from Square in a time when we desperately needed it.
Chaos.
No.
Now, with it being a Souls-like, yeah, I don't like that term either since it's just an action RPG. But with how much I'm upsetting the algorithm, let's try to play nice. With it being a Souls-like, there is one major portion that sticks out more than most, that is the gameplay. If you have a game like this that isn't fun to play, you just have a bad game people won't stick through. I can say with confidence that Stranger of Paradise can hang with the best of them, seamlessly blending the reaction-based style of Nioh with the Final Fantasy formula, using what could have been mere window dressing into its own unique style. To start off with, you have 3 bars. One is your health bar, one is your MP for using skills, and the other is a soul bar. You and your enemies all have this. If you drain your enemy's soul bar, you can instantly kill them. This includes bosses, which would instantly end their phase. If your soul bar gets drained all the way, you lose MP. You're open to getting hit, and with such a fast pace of gameplay, this can be deadly. This is referred to sometimes as crystallization, since crystals Final Fantasy, but for the sake of brevity, I'll just call it breaking. Some weapons and attacks tend to focus on the soul bar, even some jobs. That's the unique feature of Stranger, jobs. In most Souls-like, you make a build or character class and you're just stuck with it. Stranger says forget all that, pick any job you want and you can change them on the fly. This game allows you to have 2 jobs at the same time, so maybe you want one that's more focused on melee and another on magic, or something heavy and something more nimble. It depends on your style of play. You can easily switch jobs with the press of a button, and I wish the game focused more on this aspect of combat. There's a ton of jobs, so you can easily find the ones you like, but you should try the others in case you run into a wall. Case in point, I died against Tiamat, and I merely returned as an axe wielder with focus on strength, turning a boss that I struggled with into a trivial matter with abilities that easily removed its head and its soul bar. Each job comes with certain weapon abilities that do transfer over. As you learn more advanced jobs that require you to master preceding ones in a tree, you're going to have a breadth of different weapon skills. Jobs also have specific traits that once learned are learned forever and can be set no matter what job you're currently using. All these skills use NP, which you have a small stock with at the start, but every time you break an enemy, you not only replenish MP, but gain more maximum MP. So that just allows you to continue your flow of combat without having worrying too much if you can spare the resources. Plus, every time you break an enemy, it creates an area of effect, reducing all nearby opponent's soul bar. So there were cases where doing one break creates a cascading effect, giving you tons of MP. Now, these break events, while cool at first and fast, can break the flow of combat and can be run-of-the-mill and tiresome near the end of the game. Some weapon skills will break the enemy if it depletes their soul bar, but I feel like this should have been mandatory. As in, if you're strong enough, it just does it automatically. It's not game breaking, but something that can be improved upon. Besides attacking, there's also guarding. Some jobs have a shield, while others it's best to just dodge. Enemies have 3 kind of attacks that are announced, showing its RPG roots. One attack has a yellow outline. You can either block it with a reduction to your soul bar, or do a soul block. A soul block allows you to not only block, but regain MP and then attack a defenseless enemy. This comes at a cost. Doing a soul block rapidly drains that soul bar, and even if you do it successfully, you still take a hit to your soul. So you really have to know when the attack connects to not leave yourself open. I do wish this was tweaked a bit, as in I feel there should have been no reduction when blocking with the soul shield because it's already being drained every second your timing is off. There's already a detriment to it. Sure, you might abuse it that way, but it's high risk, high reward. If you can master that kind of system, good on you. Next are purple attacks. These can either be blocked or with the right timing absorbed. When you absorb it, the enemy takes a soul hit, and those skills you absorbed are called instant abilities and can be used, as they say on the tin, instantly. There were actually times when I was in the right groove, I was able to reduce massive chunks of a boss life by absorbing and then instantly using those attacks. It felt so satisfying. It felt like the game was rewarding me for rightfully reading the situation. Lastly, there are red attacks. Like the color, they mean danger. They take away the most health, cannot be blocked, absorbed, or soul blocked. These attacks typically have a large windup to them, but not always. Again, an issue, I felt that some of them were a bit too quick and could use a bit of rebalancing. But for the most part, when I saw a red attack, I was able to get out of the way in time. I've used the term reaction based. Others have said this feels more akin to a rhythm game. Think Arkham Batman, but more fleshed out, and I can see it. The combat is so satisfying. I felt in control of Jack every time, and almost every time I took a hit, I felt like it was my fault. I reacted wrong. For the most part. A thing about doing videos is one must spend a lot of time on these games, more than most people, and very, very, very rarely there were times where I tried canceling an attack for a roll, and it didn't happen, causing me to take a hit. So it's more than likely a glitch or an error, and I think most players probably will never experience it. So yes, if you died, it's your fault and not the game's. For the last chunk of combat, you have companions, which we'll delve into later for their character arcs. But as it pertains to battle, they're not dumb. I never once felt that any of my party was dead weights, and they actively contributed towards combat, reducing enemies' health or soul bar, while also healing me if needed. Now, unlike Jack, they cannot access all jobs and have a limited pool, so one must think of their party setup, as some setups will work better than others, depending on the stage you're entering. You can even direct your allies to go all out, which I use mostly for boss battles. There were a few times where a boss was near soul death, and I just had said allies go all out and make quick work of the boss. Overall, I enjoyed this form of combat that Stranger provided. It's both fast-paced but at the same time strategic. It's not as offense-oriented as Bloodborne, or defense-oriented as Dark Souls, but somewhere firmly in the middle. I would say it's more reaction-based, knowing your enemy's moves, range, and how to properly react to it, whether it's a block, dodge, or absorb. And because enemies also have a soul bar that can refill, you can't rest during combat. You must always be in some way, shape, or form reacting. The game wants you to play and keep moving to continue Jack's journey. This is also seen in how it treats death. In all Soul-likes, there's a cost to dying. Here you only lose a portion of your MP bar, which you can easily regain by just re-breaking an enemy. Some may see this as too easy, as if Dark Souls isn't an easy game. And on New Game Plus, you will lose your entire stock of MP unless you get to the area where you died. But even then, it's rather easy to regain all your MP, which works. There's no need to punish the player severely. Dying and losing progress in a level is punishment enough.
Chaos.
No.
It's now time to talk about the difficulty of the game, and the base game isn't too overly hard. Well, I joked that it's about as easy as Dark Souls, and I can do an entire video on that series' overhyped difficulty. To put it bluntly, I feel like I have a decent level of skill when it comes to video games. I'm never gonna be able to do a no damage run of Bloodborne, but I'm also, capable of beating it. So I feel like I can give a good breath of what difficulty is. That being said, Stranger offers a decent level of challenge. Depending on your job, you might find things more difficult, but a simple change of strategy is sometimes all it takes. All enemies are weak to certain forms of damage, whether it be blunt, slashing, or differing elements. This is helped with plentiful save points, so you're never too far from where you died. Lastly, if you need an extra boost and you find a different setup just isn't doing it, you have access to a blacksmith where you can upgrade your weapons and even choose what skills each weapon should have. Each job has a specific stat attached to it, so as an example, I used a job with axes with an emphasis on strength and charging. If I gave all my weapons and equipment a strength boost from said blacksmith, most bosses were dead in a hit or two. This isn't really needed, one can play the game without it, but if need be, such solution allows those unaccustomed to games of this nature and even playing ground at a small cost. It does require materials that come from breaking down weapons, armors, and accessories, but with how plentiful those are, one only needs to replay a stage a few times. I feel like this is perfect because higher skilled players will be able to just play the game normally, but it allows those at a lower level who may be unaccustomed to the idea of an action RPG a chance to still enjoy the game and stay true to its RPG roots. Just a bit of grinding and allowing more access is always a good thing. The only sticking point is the first boss. A lot of people seem to have issues with Garland, but he's there to teach you the game mechanics, to dodge, to absorb his skills, and to use your party members. So if you're personally turned off by overly difficult games, Strangers is not so. It strikes a perfect balance. Besides its difficulty and equipment, its RPG roots are pretty evident in something else that sets it apart. It's the fact you have a team. Apparently when in development there was a discussion as to whether it should be a solo or a party. It was decided to keep it to a Final Fantasy game. A party was needed. You start with 2 members, Jed and Ash, and then you gain 2 more, Neon and Sophia. You can only bring 2 at a time, so you can swap them out before any mission you take. Now, I actually love these characters and the rapport they have with one another. They're friends, but they also insult one another in a way that, well, friends do. It's one of those, I can talk smack about him, but really only me. I've earned that right. While it's a short game, I did grow fond of that witty rapport the crew had with one another. While there is a party, the star of the show is Jack. The character described as a moody teenager, and with some reviewers saying that, well, if you're gonna play this game, you really have to stomach him. I will say this, I think Jack is awesome, cause they lean all the way into him. My favorite part is when the Lich is about to go on some long exposition and, well, just watch.
Dream, no matter how much you wish it, that season will never come. It will remain a dream so long as I live. Who I am.
I don't give a fuck who you are.
The thing about Jack, and I say this with no joke, he is a badass. Because the people designing him think he's just that. It's pretty clear this wasn't a corporate boardroom cutting and pasting design. No, this wasn't a bunch of suits with kids and wives who hate them being like, what is it that the kids are into these days? Bussin'? Are kids into public transportation? It's things like that that give us the rapping robot in Power Rangers.
I had a lot of questions about human emotion. They were vexing me, hexing me like some sorcerer's potion. So I followed the advice of my good friend Noah. And to the city library this robot did a go.
God, it's not even old enough to be kitschy. No, you can tell that Tetsuya Nomura, who is the character designer, wholeheartedly believes this is what makes a badass. Because he swears, he punches first, asks questions later, and sometimes he's like, I don't need a story, give me some directions while I jam out some rock. I'm not gonna make a joke about this. This is what Nomura thinks is a badass. The man designed it with confidence and shipped it out to the world. There is something endearing about that level of confidence and almost indifference to what other people think. Maybe it's the middle school edgelord in me, but I didn't find Jack annoying. I enjoyed my time with him throughout the entire adventure, and I will happily list him off as a great protag in any Final Fantasy series, even surpassing some of our greatest heroes, like the fabled Onion Kid, with his mounds of charisma and his big sack of onions. That's not the only thing connecting this to other Final Fantasies. The game leans into it, and I wish it did more. Now, every level is based on a different game in the mainline series, but only in the most minute of senses. If you didn't read the little intros before stages, it would be hard to guess that the fire level was actually based on the one from Final Fantasy VIII. For me, it just kind of felt like a generic fire level. So yeah, a lot of the stages didn't really wow me. It felt like, here's your snow level, here's your fire level. The one that I knew for sure was based on Final Fantasy VII was the Mako reactor. Because, well, it has Mako in the name. With Stranger going deep into sci-fi roots saying how these places are formed partially from other dimensions, the Mako reactor saying Dimension 7, so pretty easy to parse its origins. It feels like a lost opportunity to not lean more heavily onto its source material. That would have worked best because this game is in many ways a love letter to itself, and the greater Final Fantasy franchise as a whole, embodying what it has been and will continue to be. Sadly though, for the most part, the levels are serviceable. None are particularly bad. Well, minus the one based on 6. Maybe it was my TV, but I just thought it looked so ugly and actually hurt my eyes just looking at this jumbled mess. Honestly, if you didn't tell me this was from 6, I would have no idea. Besides the Mako reactor one, there's really only a few that without reading its intros, I could say with confidence I knew where it was from. The stages also have some baffling designs. Shortcuts are a thing in Souls-like, usually to help you better connect yourself to the larger world, or a useful way to move past a difficult portion of the area. With its more mission-based structure, the shortcuts here feel useless. Kicking down a ladder to another area you're never going to visit again just seems like poor level design. And again, quite odd seeing is that I never felt this way in Nioh. I don't want to feel like I'm saying the levels are bad, so we're going to end on a solid. And that is to say that the music in this game is great. And many of the levels do take musical motifs of the games of which they took inspiration from, which is a nice touch. With over 35 years and many musical styles, it's nice to see them all mixed in one package. I know we said positive, but one negative is that there is battle music, and yeah, it's good, but that works better in a standard RPG. Here I feel like I couldn't fully get into the overall stage music, which is once more astounding, because I was constantly fighting and getting interrupted by the battle music. Just something of note for a hopeful sequel.
Chaos.
No.
We now have to talk about the criticisms or flaws of this game, and the actual flaws, not that Jack is an edgelord, which is a plus. And many of the issues I have with Stranger are the same ones I had with Nioh, which is no shock considering they were made by the same studio. The first is, well, the stages. Unlike the overall level structure that Dark Souls has with having a large interconnected world, Stranger, like Nioh, has a mission-based structure, where you can select what stage you wish to proceed. This isn't a bad thing, and I don't dislike the setup. It's more so the side missions. After beating a level, you can actually go back and do a side mission, and all these really entail are the same thing 90% of the time. You just go through the stage you just went through, but in reverse. And it's fighting or finding something. Many of them are short, like 2 minutes, and really feel unneeded. This isn't a brief change of pace, nor is it challenging. It's just doing the same level you just did, but condensed and reverse. It adds nothing. An issue that's solitary to Stranger and not Nioh is the enemy variety. In other games, you can get away with having a sparse selection of enemies, but RPGs like Final Fantasies have enemies that are staples of the series. You don't really run into many mainstays. You'll run into a Sahagin, a bomb, but a lot of the enemies are just recycled, so you better get used to just fighting goblins with every once in a while them throwing you a giant or some of the better known enemies like a Marlboro. And one behemoth. But overall, if you're looking for familiar faces like Ifrit, then you're out of luck. The biggest detriment to the game is, well, the equipment system. I wasn't a huge fan of it in Nioh, and it's even worse here somehow. You get a lot of equipment. Every level you get close to 100 or more items. Most you can just go ahead and break down to power up your weapons and armor you want. The issue comes later in the game when the equipment starts getting rarity rankings, but also job bonuses. The higher the bonus percentage is, the more perks you can unlock for that job. This is overall detrimental to the game because let's say you want to switch jobs. Instead of simply having the weapon needed and maybe the armor class, it's not simple. If you want the most out of it, you need to make sure that both your weapons and armor have job points towards the job you want. These points are all random, by the way. Now the funny thing is, in the base game, you don't really need these perks, you can ignore it. You can beat the game without using them, which begs the question, why have them? All it does is remove one of the strong points of this game, which is changing jobs. On higher difficulties though, your gear is important, and in my opinion, you're going to want those perks. This doesn't help when you start getting equipment that gives you 2 job bonuses at once. But with over 20 jobs, who in their right mind is going to grind to have all the gear for the right affinities for every single possible job? This discourages players because instead of experimenting with other jobs, you'll merely find 2 or 3 you like and just stick with them and focus on those. Add to that, all your teammates also have equipment, so if you want them decked out, you gotta make sure that you're watching what they're wearing. This is even worse in the DLC because now there's another set of bonuses you have to look out for. So not only do you have to look out for the rarity, but also what jobs are being boosted, but also a summon boost, and it's just ridiculous. And without the right gear, the DLC can be painfully annoying. So you either have to use this terrible equipment system or find broken ways to just beat the DLC. I did the broken path. The post-game or New Game Plus is also not great. Instead of having the entire map open to you, you now have to use another item to go ahead and open stages on the higher difficulties. But you need to unlock every level around 15 times. Let me explain. Each stage has a character level, which dictates the level of the enemies you fight, what level you should be, and the gear that's dropped. In the base game, this is pretty simple. Each new stage is a higher level. In post game, each stage now has multiple variations, and in these variations, there are rewards that increase your job cap, which you of course want. So the only way to increase the jobs or get the ones you want are simply redoing the same stages, but with enemies only getting slightly more difficult. This is just a grind, and overall redoing the same stages over and over and over is not fun no matter how great the combat is. This issue is of course exacerbated in the DLC, where there's another item that you need to grind for in order to progress the story, and the only way to get said item is to once more just do the same stages over and over again but now adding little modifiers to make it more difficult. It's astounding how bad the DLC is, considering that Neo's DLC was great. It gave us entirely new stages and bosses. The second DLC is the same, except it's objective based. You kill a certain number of enemies, do this, that, or third to gain more points to progress forward, because of course that's all it is. I'm baffled as to why all this grinding. The only reason I can think of is to hold people over between installments, but it doesn't respect players' time. There's no reason to slowly grind in between DLC drops where all you do is repeat everything all over in a loop. As ironic as that is story-wise. I mean, guess they got me there. Thankfully, the third DLC was actually great, but you do need a proper setup, which means a good deal of monotonous grinding, or, using some broken skills. It's overall a shame because the stories of the DLC themselves and how they elevate both the game and the greater lore is overshadowed by the equipment system and padding it out via grinding, which is really the biggest two sticking points for me when it comes to Stranger. The last knock, maybe, is the graphical quality. I played and got footage for this on the PS5, and I have never had any issues. I have heard that the game doesn't play the best on last gen systems. It still plays, but it's just more the gap between last gen and current gen is growing ever wider. So if you play it on a modern system, you're not going to have any issues. With that said, we're about to get into the meat of the story, so here's where to skip. I'll give you some time. Now, as a prequel to the original Final Fantasy, it starts with, well, the three heroes as the four warriors of light, which I'm no math genius, but something's already pretty funky there. Let's do some quick math, crunch these numbers. Yeah, 3 does not equal 4, not even in Steiner math. Along with crystals, they also share a common ailment of amnesia, none of them knowing much about their past, merely they have an ingrained mission to search for chaos. Presenting their crystals to the King of Cornelia, who then has them do a bunch of trials that we never see before okaying them. Kind of weird not to show us, but whatever. It's now off to the Chaos Shrine to find its master, and like the prophecy, defeat him and free darkness from the land. After the fight, it's revealed that Chaos was actually Neon, a warrior who lost her party falling into despair. She decided to become Chaos, a false one, in the hopes of being defeated in order to give the people of Cornelia some hope. With our own crystal in tow, we go back to the king, who says chaos is nothing more than a myth to give people hope. Because the idea is that there is a singular big bad that all problems are caused by, and that by defeating it, all will be well instead of larger systemic problems. The king elaborates that by restoring the crystals, they'll bring peace to the land. Jack is skeptical of this explanation to say the least, but goes on to the next area, Pravika. There, a kid throws a rock at you, and I'm not sure if Jack was about to beat this kid up, but he gets stopped, unfortunately, before we find that answer. The kid's angry because his dad was enlisted to find one of the crystals and died. This, along with Neon's party who perished, adds a nice element that there is something bad in regards to prophecies. We never see it because we are the hero. Our party is the one destined to win. But how many others have died before the heroes came, doing anything in desperation to turn back the tides of misfortune, only to leave behind loved ones and create a cycle of misery that never seems to end? How many other parties thought they were the warriors of light, only to lose their lives in some ignoble manner, lost in a dungeon never to be heard from again? Am I overthinking things? Probably, but I still enjoyed that small exchange, and every town in the original Final Fantasy seems to be on the back end, so I enjoyed this somewhat depressing tone. Pravika is now run by pirates led by Bike. However, unlike the original game, here you actually fight Bike, and one of my favorite things of Strangers is taking these characters that had maybe one line and expanding on them. In Bike stage, you also find your first supplemental drops, items which fill in the story and discuss the Stranger program. Beating Bike, he tells you to go find Astos, King of the Dark Elves. Again, another minor character with an enhanced story. I really enjoyed Astos' design in the original game where he resides in an abandoned castle. So this look where he appears both sickly and inhuman with digits that more resemble a monster, I think worked really well. Astos says that chaos does exist, and Jack and his crew will make a deal with that being, before telling them to head towards the tower to find the Wind Crystal. Nothing really happens after the next 2 stages, which is fine. Not everything needs to change the narrative. After 2 bosses, you then go to the Flying Fortress, which exists in space. You're kinda knocked out, but you see another girl before you wake up. A lot of people seem to dislike Stranger because, well, now you're in space and the story gets kind of weird and kooky. But I'll argue that's just part and parcel with Final Fantasy or a JRPG. There's a reason there's that meme of Chapter 1, Fight Goblins, Final Chapter, Kill God. It's nothing new. Part 1 at the end throws sci-fi elements like robots and time paradoxes. Part 2 starts off with a story of rebellion against a tyrannical ruler, a small but spirited group of rebels trying to fight against a globe-spanning empire, and ends with you basically fighting the devil. Part 4 starts off with a knight wondering, can he follow a king if his command goes against his heart? Can cruelty and violence ever be excused for any reason? Can sins ever be truly forgiven? And it ends with you discovering there's moon racists. We have moon supremacists. I'm not complaining, I enjoy all the games I mentioned. I'm merely extrapolating that yeah, Final Fantasy games are JRPGs. They get weird, but that's their charm. In the space station, you then meet Tiamat, the Fiend of Wind. After defeating her, you meet the woman you saw earlier, with the darkness of the Fiend overwhelming them. The woman Sophia absorbs it in her crystal, explaining that that is their function. She decides to go with Jack's party, saying her memories are fuzzy, but she knows she's died in this place many times, and also has an urge to kill Chaos. The terminal at the fortress reveals where the next crystals are. It's off to the Earth Shrine. Along the way, Jack gets a vision of a sterile white room, seeing a plethora of just outlines, all saying something similar to "good to be working with you." Some are obviously Ash and Jed, but others are just random voices and shapes. At the Earth Crystal, Jack has an image in his mind of Ash dying. Snapping back into reality, it's time to fight the Lich, whose redesign I actually quite like. Its appendages being used like axes work well for this more action-oriented title. It still works like a mage using magic and calling forth the dead, but overall a nice blend of its roots mixed with updates for this title. The Lich is defeated and we see another body not synced with reality, almost like a distortion or a glitch. Having no idea who this person is, it's time to go back to space. Astos is there as he talks about Lufenia, a country in the original game who he said created the world and that they're the reason these distortions, like the fortress, have appeared. Lufenia Temeni is just a fairy tale, a land that existed long ago, but was at war with Cornelia. Their science, which was so advanced it seemed like sorcery, providing them an advantage until one day, Lufenia merely disappeared. Astos reveals they are real, that is of course if you trust Astos. With the location of the next crystals, he warns the party that the darkness they encounter can drag you into the past or turn you into a monster. The next boss battle, the darkness once more surrounds the party with Sophia spouting the mist is darkness. Which we already kind of figured that. It's a story of light and dark. The obvious darkness is obvious darkness. Jack has another vision, the white room again with a static stranger saying, "This device, the crystal, will store your memories." Next fiend up, the Marilith. No radical changes to the design, sword snake woman, and she fights like so. Honestly, probably my favorite fight of the fiends, she's constantly attacking and moving. Even behind her isn't a safe spot because she can use her tail. Honestly, she should probably have been the last fiend. With her defeated, we see another distortion in place holding a crystal similar to the party. The darkness then goes into Neon's crystal. Back to the Sky Fortress, Astos congratulates you and says, yeah, those pirates you beat up, they're actually really upset. Because they can't be pirates as you saved the water crystal for last, which, you know, I already beat them, but they're also pirates. Oh, you won't help me loot and plunder? Like, they're pirates, what do I care? Well, off to the final crystal. Along the way, Jet starts to question what really is their purpose. That something seems fishy. The beings they saw, brief instances of past, and only vague feelings of some divine purpose they must fulfill. Jack has another vision of Jed saying that he's a nobody where they are, so he wants to become a warrior of light. Another revelation, this time from Neon, saying she's from Cornelia and that her crystal was given to her by Astos. Even though she knows her past, for the most part she wants to see this through. The Kraken is probably my least favorite redesign. He is better off as a thick boy in my opinion. After releasing the last crystal, we see another glitch and a vision of someone merely called a Lufenian saying how this device works to keep hold of your memories, with Jack saying he's better off without them. Going back to Cornelia, the townspeople still kinda hate you. They know math, which, hey, good for them. saying there's supposed to be 4 Warriors of Light, not 5. Clearly one's a fake. Even the king is like, you released the crystals, but we still have problems, what's going on? Princess Sarah is the only voice of reason, saying these things take time and now is their time to lead. Before anything can happen, BK's pirates and monsters invade the town. Fighting BK a second time, he's been possessed by the darkness, even claiming Jack should be careful of rage and seek Astos. He has the answers. Whether he's fighting chaos or working with chaos, he knows the answers. Sophia remarks, unlike every other time that felt like deja vu, this is a new experience past this point. Finding Astos, he's being attacked by an iron giant, who's a great battle in design. Being more mechanical and akin to a weapon of war as opposed to an empty suit or a big monster. My favorite part is the second phase where he loses his lower body, but his arms and torso can still attack. It's great. After defeating him and absorbing more darkness, you see the Lufenian again telling you the crystal stores your memories, and then you go and see Astos. If it wasn't obvious by now, the narrative reveals the party, sans Neon, are not from this world. They are strangers in both a literal sense and a figurative one in having no memories. The narrative reveals that the Lufenians did exist in the same world as everyone else. However, they went to war with Cornelia. There's no answers for how the war started, but it's evident that Lufenia was the instigator, because all of the logs written by them all talk about their contempt for humanity. They see themselves as a different species, essentially. Eventually, they met a collaborator who gave them a way to disconnect from the world and exist outside the dimension. This collaborator is heavily implied to be Shinryu, the super boss from 5 and the main antagonist of the Dissidia series. Told you we'll get to it. As you question the Dark Elf and his role, Astos says he's merely doing his job, to monitor the darkness, but he shall reveal more once the party gets rid of some troublesome monsters. He also reveals the bats that flank him are Lufenians, ones he turned into bats. On to the next stage, the party discusses that Jack needs a purpose, how he seems to be nothing without one. Fighting the boss, we see more of this Lufenian who talks about balance and things that are not in order do not belong in their paradise. The party discusses that their job must have been regulators, as darkness, too much of it can corrupt people and make monsters. The logs also reveal that crystals are not some divine object, but rather scientific tools in order to balance light and darkness. But, being big shiny rocks that have a physical effect on the world, when there's a quake, the earth crystal quells it, and so on, people are naturally drawn to them and worship them. And as people go near them, they draw in their light. That throws off balance, so Lufenia then tosses in darkness in order to counteract it. However, darkness makes people turn into monsters, and when mixed with emotions, can make fiends, beings that Lufenia is unable to control, hence the need for regulators or strangers. This is actually why Jack is so obsessed with chaos, describing it more akin to a hunger or a thirst. This was implanted inside him, and with no mission left, he feels hollow. Some still dislike Jack's character, the writing that even if you give a reason, it still doesn't make it good. But once more, I enjoyed Jack, and I thought that the rationale behind it enhanced his character and the overall story. The party decides they need more concrete answers, so they go to Astos. The Dark Elf once more asks if he remembers anything else. Saying no, you then fight him, his second form turning into the Ultima weapon. After slaying him and absorbing the darkness, you see the truth. Astos was an administrator, an elf turned into a being like that by Lufenia, telling Jack he's just a tool and that others have died before protecting tools like him. In a past cycle, Jack says he wants to rebel against Lufenia and he'll remember Astos. In a rather heartbreaking moment, Astos refuses to fist bump Jack like he did previously, knowing it's an impossibility. He promised to lead Jack to the truth, and he did. His spirit's broken because somewhere deep down, he hoped his friend would remember him. Happy that the truth is known at the end, he tells Jack his death will bring more darkness, that to slay the beast that arrived because Lufenia fears chaos. When darkness and emotion merge as one, chaos is born, a being similar to the fiends but much more powerful and out of their control. He then makes Jack promise to stop Lufenia from toying with humanity. Going back to Cornelia, there's more monsters. The king and queen are likely dead. The townspeople hate you, as Princess Sarah says she still needs to lead her people. She doesn't care if she dies. Knocking her out, the townspeople now love you, mostly because it's their only choice. As Jack and crew decide how to best save the townspeople, they're all killed by monsters, even Sarah. As she lay dying, more of Jack's memories are revealed. In another loop, the two of them actually fell in love with each other, and he revealed his full name, Jack. Jack Garland, the final boss of the original Final Fantasy and the one who kidnapped Princess Sarah at the start of the game. Stranger says that he did love her, and this is what spurred Jack to stop Lufenia. In their obsession of balance between light and dark, when things didn't go their way, they simply reset their world. Cornelia is stuck in a never-ending past. Jack was tired of Lufenia seeing Cornelia as nothing but test subjects and thus dragged Astos into this conspiracy. In the logs, it gets even worse. Lufenia decides that instead of sending regulators or strangers, it might be best to just flood the world with darkness. This will increase the monster population drastically, which will either outright just destroy humanity, make sure they're all turned to monsters, or the few remaining humans will be hunted down by monsters. They're calling for an outright cull of humanity. They're calling for a genocide. And as they write it, they're so self-righteous, because they keep talking about how they wanted to help shepherd mankind into paradise, while in the same logs calling them a scourge and an issue to be dealt with. With humanity gone, there would be no fear of chaos. The reason that Jack and his crew memories are stripped is because emotions cannot be quantified nor contained. This is self-evident when Sarah at the start asks them to find Garland, and when she dies, she actually seems aware of past cycles. To make it more heartbreaking, many cycles happened before this one. Astos even saying, "This is the third time I'm trying to lead you to the truth." Knowing their role, the rest of Jack's crew begins to fight him. They want him to absorb their darkness in order for him to become chaos. To merge darkness and emotion as one. The one being Lufenia cannot control, chaos. This is the only path. Even in their memories where Jack's Lufenian advisor speaks of strangers being valuable, they know all the fiends they killed were just that, strangers, absorbing too much darkness and becoming fiends. Thus, they were sent to hunt down their own comrades, some they probably knew at one point in time. Like Cornelia, they were nothing less than disposable pawns. In the first flashback, there were so many voices that were telling us hello. How many of those did Jack know? How many of those became fiends and Jack killed without knowing that he killed a friend? After giving them their wish and killing your friends, which honestly did suck. Again, I really enjoyed the character interactions between all of them. They were useful, I did not want them dead. Now you're overflowing with darkness and head to the Chaos Shrine. Like how the original Final Fantasy game started, the end is the beginning. Heading to the shrine, you hear the real reason why Lufenia reset the world so much. Because one day humans might grow strong enough to reach them, to stand as the same soil as them, and that cannot happen. Jack's now super powered. You have infinite soul bar and MP, so, go nuts. You eventually reach something called the Dimensional Matrix, the device that's allowed Lufenia untold control over this world, and you destroy it. Lufenia has no choice but to remove themselves from this world. Victory is short-lived when darkness manifests, the accumulation of the world's darkness arrives. Jack absorbs it. Darkness plus emotion. He has now become chaos. Lufenia tells them that he's disconnected and he can't reach them. He laughs, saying he'll come for them, that they can't hide. They can no longer pretend to be gods. In their fear, before disconnecting the world, they reset it once more in the hopes of killing Jack. Before they do, they say balance is everything, and one day a warrior light will defeat him as they attempt to erase him. But it's not meant to be, as his comrades, now themselves the four fiends from the original game, having the necessary components to become so, pull Jack into the past before he can be erased. They then decide to make the false dream of the warriors a lie told by Lufenia to placate the masses, into reality, spreading the idea from 2,000 years into the past so someone will take up the mantle. Mankind needs hope to stave off darkness. We then see more of Jack, now Garland, as he talks to Sarah, saying he'll come back for her, with her jesting her father will send an army. He then says, well, if he sends an army, I'll have to become a Dark Lord and steal you away. And he does just that, wandering in some dope armor by the way, absconding with the princess, and then waiting on his throne as the warriors of light arrive and make their way to him. Even if he doesn't stop Lufenia, if he can make warriors stronger than himself, they can become mankind's protector. And thus our story ends as Final Fantasy I begins, with the warriors of light ready to take on Garland. Well, kinda. DLC time. Now, I already said the DLC is subpar, and that's evident with the first one, The Trials of the Dragon King. The gameplay adds nothing new besides some more job options, increased job cap, and the ability to add special effects to your jobs that you can customize at will. The only new gameplay it adds is a fight against the Dragon King Bahamut, which is a real shame. Bahamut himself is rather interesting. So the DLC starts off with you fighting the Warriors of Light, and they're incredibly easy. After their defeat, we see a spirit talking to Bahamut, a Bahamut from another world. Following this light, the party meets the Dragon King himself, who offers trials in order to give them power. Every so often you can talk to him as more of his story is revealed. Here it's actually inferred that this Bahamut, the one from the first Final Fantasy, is the same one from Final Fantasy 15, because he has swords around him and his title being the Sword Bearer. He also talks about a god that was dethroned by humanity, and he wants to test Jack to see what drives mankind. Why do they fight so hard? After his own defeat, he's curious about mankind's power. So I had to read the 15 novel, which isn't the first time I read a book for a video. Hint hint, wink wink. The novel adapts the unused DLC where Bahamut is like, you know what? Screw humans, I'm tired of them, and plans to just destroy all current life on the planet with one giant draconic burst and simply start over. The party of 15 stops him and in the process destroys all the summons in their world along with magic and the crystals themselves. After all the talks he had with Bahamut, Jack seems impartial with the idea of a god leading them, saying humanity needs to see things through by themselves. Thinking back on his defeat, he agrees with Jack, and once the party clears the trials, they gain a rat's tail. Bahamut reveals the item appears as different things to different people, but says he will upgrade Jack's party. Jack says instead it's to give the Warriors of Light trials and thus allow them the job change from the original game. This meta-narrative I really enjoy because think about it. The job change in part 1 is completely optional. There's a good chance you might miss it and never attain it. So this follows what might happen to the player. You then fight the Warriors of Light once more, and while you still win, he's stronger. Bahamut kept his word. Jack wins and remarks, "I'll look forward to this in another 2,000 years," smirking knowing that the Warriors of Light are getting stronger and may one day finally dethrone him. So for the first DLC, I think the story really shines and the battle with Bahamut is fun, but again, you're just replaying the same game. We then get the next DLC, The Wanderer of the Rift. The mastermind behind this DLC is Jack's Lufenian supervisor. Although Lufenia seems to have abandoned the idea of killing Jack, she has not. So she has sent Gilgamesh in the hopes of defeating the party. This Gilgamesh is the Gilgamesh from every other game. Originating in Final Fantasy V, he's the same one in 8, 9, 12, Dissidia. He hops between dimensions, and Nil the Lufenian hopes that such a unique being can destroy another unique being like Jack. So she uses her technology to summon him. Lufenia may have abandoned their plans for this world, but she is still terrified of Jack. This DLC is honestly worse than the last one in terms of execution. Once more, all that happens is a level boost, new job, that you're probably not going to invest in, and even more gear you have to care about. Now instead of doing levels, it's a labyrinth with short spurts, so choosing options like fight this many enemies or find the exit. Once more, it's just doing the same thing you've been doing in the base game, just now with a level cap boost. Earlier I mentioned how every stage has variations that you have to keep unlocking to get those job level increases. That's the case for Trials of the Dragon King and Wanderer of the Rift. It got so tedious, I just decided to start cheating. When you beat the game, you unlock Chaos Mode, which gives you unlimited soul bar and MP. The Liberator Job's special ability allows you to convert damage to your MP instead of your HP. You in effect now have an unlimited health bar. It's a shame I felt so drained at this point because somehow this DLC is worse story-wise, because they really stretched out. You meet Gilgamesh and fight him, and the fight is pretty interesting. As you talk, he says he didn't cause this, but he's met a Garland before. The party is of course shocked because they've never met anyone like Gilgamesh before. The best way to describe Gilgamesh is a theater kid that got jacked. He is gregarious and theatrical, always talking like he's the main character in his own one-man show, heaping praise onto either himself or, if you beat him, his opponent. After all, you must be amazing to defeat the great Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is indeed great and actually pairs well with Jack's more straight man routine. Gilgamesh says that he's not the man named Garland that he met before in a world filled with battles. He's talking about Dissidia, that Garland. He also says that he's a traveler of both space and time, that while Jack and Garland from the original series are different, they share similarities, and that Garland may just be a future version of Jack. Declaring each other rivals, he then reveals he's not responsible for any of this, and it might be Lufenia that in their need to destroy Jack, they unleash something that could destroy this entire dimension. Lufenia, who once lived by a balance of light and dark, is willing to not only destroy humanity, but an entire dimension itself filled with planets that have untold civilizations, all to stop one man. We then learn that Nil attached something to Gilgamesh that's causing the imbalance, and it's honestly great. It's the War Mech, called Death Machine here, the first super boss in the original Final Fantasy game. A creature that was capable of actually destroying parties in one turn. Defeating the beast, Gilgamesh congratulates you and Nil promises her revenge. Now you might be thinking, how is this worse story-wise? Well, that's because most of the info comes from Gilgamesh and he only relays it after fighting him. And you have to fight him 6 times. That is too much. I was tired of seeing him the 3rd time. Once finished, the Labyrinth, which originally had 20 levels, now has 100. But I wasn't doing that. I understand the idea was to hold you off till the last DLC, Different Future, arrive, but it's just grinding and not even fun grinding at this point. There were things I enjoyed, like once more the meta commentary of the first super boss of the series and Gilgamesh appearing, but everything else is just mediocre. We get the final DLC, Different Future, and it's the best of the bunch. It starts with a Moogle who is the same Moogle from the Dissidia series, revealing he set Bahamut to help strengthen Jack because Nil is intent on wiping away everything in this dimension. If they cannot control this world, it's better off not existing. We go into, for once, a new area, Control, where Lufenia decides everything, and then we encounter the Emperor from Another World, the final boss of the second Final Fantasy, and man, I love this design. It feels like a Yoshitaka Amano sketch come to life. The Emperor has come right after the events of Final Fantasy Dissidia, saying he's followed Mog and plans to use all the technology here to continue his conquest and rule across all of space and time. Before we fight, he speaks of Garland and how Jack and Garland do have similarities. The fight is astounding, even if I did cheat. Just like in the second game, how he's a master of beasts, he summons these ghostly phantasms of monsters to attack, and fights like he did in Dissidia. After beating him, he leaves before Mog says that the Jack here and the Garland Dissidia are not one and the same, but that they're similar. Where does that leave us? After all, Gilgamesh said he has a feeling that Garland is merely a future version of Jack. I chose to believe that route, that they're all the same but merely at different points in time. Plus, a nice little Easter egg, if you played Dissidia, Jack and Garland have similar battle cries during certain attacks. They say the same thing. So this is why I choose to believe in the more of a Doctor Who route, where Jack's future is merely the Emperor and Mog's past. With that said, you finally confront Nil, who flat out says that those Lufenia cannot control must be destroyed. They were never interested in helping mankind. They only wanted to control them. And since they cannot be controlled, they must be eradicated. So she summons Omega, one of the most famous super bosses of the series. This is what all the DLCs should have been: new areas, enemies, and bosses that are fan service to the Final Fantasy series, while also advancing the plots. After beating Omega, Nil uses the Dimensional Matrix, similar to the one Jack destroyed, to merely summon more copies and merge with it. After defeating her, Moogle tells Jack to pick up the Matrix and Crystal, but he decides not to, saying his next path is to wait for the Warriors of Light to kill them. Moogle says if that happens, no one will know Jack's struggle, that it will be nothing more than a forgotten legend. And as he thinks of Sarah, he's fine with that, because now that he has killed Nil and Lufenia has left this dimension, all that's left is to raise the heroes and leave fate in mankind's hand. But wait, there's a remix. This is called Different Future. So there's an alternate path where the Emperor comes back and decides to use the Matrix for his own ends. You fight him again, which I don't mind because it's 2 and not 6, and toss him back to his world powerless. In this path, it hints Jack takes the crystal and goes onto a different future, possibly a new entry in Dissidia. In the normal story, Jack once again fights the Warrior of Light, who's a lot stronger. A narrative stroke that I continue to enjoy. Just like Bahamut when you were younger and first introduced to games like Final Fantasy, how many times did you die against a tough boss? What happened? You tried again, maybe leveled up, maybe tried new strategies, got new equipment. You slowly built up your skill. The Warrior of Light is the player, and after defeating him once more, the next stage you play as him, using all your skills you learned in the game to defeat yourself and finally bring peace upon a land and peace to the false Warrior of Light, Jack Garland.
Chaos.
No.
Needless to say, I greatly enjoyed my time with Stranger of Paradise, and I am once more shocked at its lackluster reception. Its fast, rhythmic pace of gameplay, character interactions that I adore, a story that is both at once kind of insane but also fitting into what Final Fantasy and JRPGs are all at once. It's an amazing experience in a time where Square cared little about providing that. The only sticking points are really skeletons from its roots as a Neo game, an equipment system that's too bulky and having too many things to keep track of without feeling like it helps all that much, and a DLC that has shining moments but overall feels lazy and more designed to waste time than expand on the experience the base game supplies. When it comes to whether this is actually canon or not, Kazushige Nojima, the writer, who's also served as a scenario writer for mainline entries like 7, 8, and 10, said that, personally, yeah, it's a prequel to the original Final Fantasy, but it's up to the player to decide if that's the case or not. Reception thankfully changed more towards a positive with the release of the third DLC. Tetsuya Nomura, who's also what happens when you accidentally spill a can of Monster Energy drink on the clothes you wore in middle school, stated that while publicity was bad at first, he's glad so many have enjoyed Jack's journey and are clamoring for a sequel, and that if interest proves great enough, will be considered. It's not a definite yes, but please, dear God, I hope so. There's so many ideas you can do. Firstly, you can continue the story threads from a different future to find this collaborator, or you can even just start with the second game. Firion is known as a weapons master and can canonically equip any weapon he wants, so he can easily be any class if you wanted to do part 2. All they need to do is make the stages a bit more vibrant, drop that outdated equipment system, give us a few more enemies and bosses to fight, and continue to improve on what made the game great, which was the action, the story, and that pace of gameplay. Make it so switching jobs isn't so cumbersome because experimenting was the best part. Obviously, I cannot praise this game enough. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5. That's how good I think it is. But please just try it out. Look past all your preconceived notions and just see for yourself, and join others on the hunt for chaos. Whew. Well, guys, gals, and those in between, that was a lot. It was an adventure and not one into paradise. I basically hinted at the next video, so watch out for that. But if you missed it, it's Parasite Eve. I read the book and saw the movie, so we're gonna have to check that out, along with 2 and the third birthday. As always, leave any comments along with any games you want me to check out. Again, especially if they're overlooked kind of middling RPGs. Those are like my bread and butter. Till then, stay blessed.